Adrian Newey is one of the most successful engineers in F1 history. He's won 12 championships and has worked with some of the best drivers and teams in the history of F1. But this is not the most impressive thing about him. Instead, it was the way he changed F1 and motorsport with his way of working. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of these characteristic moments, starting with his first days in F1. It's 1980. Newey, who had just graduated, joined a small backmarket team for Fittipaldi. And F1 in the 1980s was a dream for an engineer. Roaring engines, way less regulations, and just the perfect playground for guys like Newey. But even though he had made it into F1 as a junior, it didn't mean that it would have to stay like that for long. Because F1 back then was different. There were a lot of small teams that were barely able to qualify for an event and were run on a shoestring budget with only a small amount of employees. And teams like these always had trouble finding sponsors. This is also the reason why Fittipaldi had to close its doors in '81, because they had ran out of money. So Newey had to find a new job, and luckily for him, he got 2 offers. The first one was a role for an offer with multiple jobs. During the week, he was a technical designer for March, and on the weekends, he was a race engineer in Formula 2. It sounded pretty good, and Newey would have signed immediately if he didn't also have an offer from Lotus as an aerodynamicist. This was a tough decision to make for him. He admired Lotus and its owner, Colin Chapman, and it was always his dream to work in Formula 1. But on the other hand, the 2 jobs at March could teach him more than a simple aerodynamicist job at Lotus ever could. So he made the decision to go to March, because he wanted to work in different parts of the team to be able to fully understand the car from all perspectives. And that shows how Newey approaches his work. He doesn't just try to become the best in his field and doesn't care about the other areas in the team. Instead, he wanted to see the car from different job perspectives so that he could then use his experience when he talks to a race engineer or someone else to better understand what they mean. This is very rare in today's motorsport. Not a lot of people in F1 had the opportunity to gain experience in different working fields on that level. Most of them are specialized on one specific part of the team. Of course, there are also the ones that have this experience, but they are in the minority. But I guess this is the bonus of having been in motorsport at a time where this was still possible. And this job at March opened Newey completely new doors, because this made it possible for him to go to America to work for multiple teams in the back then kart series, which is IndyCar today. Here, he would not only be a race engineer, but also a car designer, which made him a legend in US motorsport. And his time in America would also help him later. Newey returned to F1 in 1988. This time, he would rejoin March after he had been working in the already mentioned kart series for the last few years. But he wasn't the only one to come back. March had left F1 after 1982 and now rejoined with Leighton House, a Japanese real estate company, as their main sponsor. And a lot has changed since Newey had left F1 in 1981. The Williams and the McLarens were the dominant forces in F1. The teams relied even more on engine power after ground effect got banned in 1982, and the cars had transformed into rockets with wheels. Especially the turbo made them so powerful, dangerous and pricey that it was banned for the following season. But there was one problem for Newey. March only used naturally aspirated engines, which meant that they had a massive power disadvantage. Luckily for March, there was a way to keep up with them. Because since the teams that used the turbocharged engines had a clear power advantage, they didn't care about aerodynamic deficiency. They just mounted a bigger front or rear wing and were happy with the traction it produced. And this is where Newey wanted to get them. He wanted to build a light and aerodynamically efficient car that could keep up with the turbocharged teams. Especially the monocoque and the front of the car show that. I mean, just take a look at the front wing end plates, for example. He extended and shaped them in a way so that the front wheels wouldn't touch them when they turned, but also that the front wing could create a continuous aerodynamic behavior at all time. No other team did something like this. It truly shows how innovative and clever Newey was already in a time when aerodynamics didn't really exist. And with this radically different car, the team hoped for good results. Unfortunately, This wasn't the case. Reliability issues in the beginning of the season cost him valuable time and points. But once those were ironed out, and the team understood the behavior of the car, it was finally able to show the power it had. And the Portuguese Grand Prix is worth mentioning here, because the Estoril circuit has a long right-hand corner that leads onto the start-finish straight, which you couldn't take at full tilt back then. And when the March of Ivan Capelli attempted to take it at a higher speed than anyone else had taken it before, Alain Prost in his McLaren behind him got scared. He backed off because he thought Capelli wouldn't be able to take the corner at that speed, but he could. And this last corner would also help him in the race on Sunday, because here Capelli was able to overtake Senna, one of the two dominant McLarens that season, to secure a magnificent second place. This was huge. The McLarens were the best team that season, by far, and this car with its naturally aspirated engine just overtook them. It shows how much time Newey was able to extract from the car with its efficient design. However, there is one more thing to know about Newey. But for this, we have to jump forward a few years. It's 2004. Michael Schumacher and Ferrari have dominated the sport for years, and Newey, who had won multiple championships himself by now, was working at McLaren. But it wasn't his best time in F1. He was unhappy with the team leader Ron Dennis and wanted to find a new challenge, whether that be inside or outside of F1. And it was at that time when he also started racing cars. His collection included multiple oldtimers which he raced at historic events like Le Mans or Goodwood. Unfortunately, he had some pretty big shunts, which led to several trips to the hospital, including concussions, which isn't great as an engineer in F1. But despite all of this, it helped him at his job in F1, because now he was able to understand what it was like to be a racing driver. He now had to do things like describing the behavior of the car or dealing with the pressure of wanting to perform well himself. Because when you're able to better understand how the driver wants the car to respond, you have a big advantage. The same goes for self-expectations, because the psychology of a racing driver, or an athlete in general, is different. And bear in mind, even though he only races as an amateur driver, the pressure you build inside yourself is the same. You don't want to let yourself and the others down, especially when you race at prestigious places like Le Mans, Goodwood or Monaco, where you're basically racing in a guardrail tunnel trying not to crash. But that's an exception. Not a lot of people that work in motorsport can do that, either because you can't afford it since you don't get paid a lot as an engineer in motorsport, or because they don't have the time for it, because working on a motorsport team often means working on the weekend when the races take place. This is also why Newey remembers me of the old days in racing. Back then, you were still able to afford to go racing yourself. Sure, it wasn't in the best category, and the safety of the vehicles also wasn't ideal. Nonetheless, you could live your dream. You could experience yourself what it was like to race a car in circles. But Newey is still able to do just that. Sure, it might only be because of his well-paid jobs in F1, but he only got those well-paid jobs in the first place because he can give a team something that not a lot of other people can do. And this is what makes him so special. His will to try out new things, his desire to fully understand the car from all perspectives, and his insatiable hunger to learn something new every day. That is what makes him one of the best engineers in F1 history. That is what makes him Adrian Newey. Another legendary engineer of F1 that Newey also admired was Gordon Murray, and one of his best cars was the Brabham BT46B. If you want to find out how this car almost broke F1, click on the screen here. Thank you all for watching, and until then, I'll see you next time.